Joining you now with some breaking news here at the Sky News Centre. We have Harold Pinter who's joining us. The playwright Harold Pinter, I believe, has just died. Has won the Nobel Prize for Literature. Apologies for that.
In 1958, I wrote the following: "There are no hard distinctions between what is real and what is unreal, nor between what is true and what is false. A thing is not necessarily either true or false. It can be both true and false." I believe that these assertions still make sense and do still apply to the exploration of reality through art. So as a writer, I stand by them, but as a citizen, I cannot. As a citizen, I must ask, what is true and what is false? Truth in drama is forever elusive. You never quite find it, but the search for it is compulsive. The search is clearly what drives the endeavor. The search is your task. More often than not, actually, you stumble upon the truth in the dark, colliding with it, or just glimpsing an image or a shape which seems to correspond with the truth, often without realizing you've done so. But the real truth is that never is any such thing as one truth to be found in dramatic art. There are many. These truths challenge each other, recoil from each other, reflect each other, ignore each other, tease each other, are blind to each other. Sometimes you feel you have the truth of the moment in your hands, and then it slips through your fingers and is lost. I've often been asked how my plays come about. I cannot say, nor can I ever sum up my plays, except to say that this is what happened, that's what they said, that's what they did. Most of the plays are engendered by a line, a word, or an image. The given word is often shortly followed by the image. I shall give two examples of two lines which came right out of the blue into my head, followed by an image, followed by me. The plays of The Homecoming and Old Times. The first line of The Homecoming is, "What have you done with the scissors?" The first line of Old Times is, "Dark." In each case, I had no further information. In the first case, someone was obviously looking for a pair of scissors and was demanding their whereabouts from someone else who he suspected had probably stolen them. But I somehow knew that the person addressed didn't give a damn about the scissors, or about the questioner either, for that matter. Dark, I took to be a description of someone's hair, the hair of a woman, and was the answer to a question. But in each case, I found myself compelled to pursue the matter. This happened visually, a very slow fade through shadow into light. I always start a play by calling the characters A, B, and C. In the play that became The Homecoming, I saw a man enter a stark room and ask this question of a younger man sitting on a sofa reading a racing paper. And I somehow suspected that A was a father and that B was his son, but I had no proof. This was, however, confirmed a short time later when B, later to become Lenny, said to A, later to become Max, "Dad, do you mind?" Dad, do you mind if I change the subject? I want to ask you something. The dinner we had before, what was the name of it? What do you call it? Why don't you buy a dog? You're a dog cook, honest. You think you're cooking for a lot of dogs. So since B calls A Dad, it seemed to me reasonable to assume that they were father and son. A was also clearly the cook, and his cooking did not seem to be held in high regard. Did this mean that there was no mother? I didn't know. But, as I told myself at the time, our beginnings never know our ends. Dark, a large window, evening sky, a man, A, later to become Dealey, and a woman, B, later to become Kate, sitting with drinks. Fat or thin, the man asks. Who are they talking about? But I then see, standing at the window, a woman, C, later to become Anna, in another condition of light, her back to them, her hair dark. It's a strange moment, the moment of creating characters who up to that moment have no existence. What follows is fitful, uncertain, even hallucinatory, although sometimes it can be an unstoppable avalanche. The author's position is an odd one. In a sense, he's not welcomed by the characters. The characters resist him. They're not easy to live with. They're impossible to define. You certainly can't dictate to them. To a certain extent, you play a never-ending game with them. Cat and mouse, blind man's bluff, hide and seek. But finally, you find that you have people of flesh and blood on your hands. People with will and an individual sense of sensibility of their own, made out of component parts which you're unable to change, manipulate, or distort. So, language in art remains a highly ambiguous transaction. A quicksand, a trampoline, a frozen pool which might give way under you, the author, at any time. But, as I've said, the search for the truth can never stop. It cannot be adjourned, it cannot be postponed. It has to be faced right there, on the spot. Now, political theatre presents an entirely different set of problems. Sermonizing has to be avoided at all costs. Objectivity is essential. The characters must be allowed to breathe their own air. The author cannot confine, constrict them to satisfy his own taste, or disposition, or prejudice. He must be prepared to approach them from a variety of angles, from a full and uninhibited range of perspectives. Take them by surprise, perhaps, occasionally. But nevertheless, give them the freedom to go whichever way they will. Now, this does not always work. And political satire, of course, adheres to none of these precepts. In fact, it does precisely the opposite, which is its proper function. In my play, The Birthday Party, I think I allow a whole range of options to operate in a dense forest of possibility before finally focusing on an act of subjugation. Mountain language pretends to no such range of operations. It simply remains brutal, short, and ugly. But the soldiers do have some fun, get some fun out of it. Huh? One sometimes forgets that torturers become easily bored. They need a bit of a laugh to keep their spirits up. This has been confirmed, of course, by events in Abu Ghraib in Baghdad. Mountain language lasts only 20 minutes, but it could go on, hour after hour, on and on and on. The same pattern repeated on and on and on, over and over again, hour and hour. Ashes to Ashes, on the other hand, seems to me to be taking place underwater. A drowning woman, her hand reaching up through the waves, dropping down out of sight, reaching for others, but finding no one there, either above or under the water, finding only shadows, reflections, floating. The woman, a lost figure in a drowning landscape. A woman unable to escape the doom that seemed to belong only to others. But as they died, she must die too. Political language, as used by politicians, does not venture into any of this territory, since the majority of politicians, on the evidence available to us, are not interested in truth, but in power, and the maintenance of that power. To maintain that power, it's essential that people remain in ignorance, that they live in ignorance of the truth, even the truth of their own lives. What surrounds us, therefore, is a vast tapestry of lies upon which we feed. As every single person here knows, the justification for the invasion of Iraq was that Saddam Hussein possessed a highly dangerous body of weapons of mass destruction, some of which could be fired in 45 minutes, bringing about appalling devastation. We were assured that that was the truth. It was not true. We were told that Iraq had a relationship with Al-Qaeda and shared responsibility for the atrocity in New York on September 11th, 2001. We were assured that this was true. It was not true. We were told that Iraq threatened the security of the world. We were assured it was true. It was not true. The truth is something entirely different. The truth is to do with how the United States understands its role in the world and how it chooses to embody it. Now, but before I come back to the present, I would like to look at the recent past, by which I mean the United States foreign policy since the end of the Second World War. I believe it is obligatory upon us to subject this period to at least some kind of limited scrutiny, which is all the time will allow here. Everyone knows what happened in the Soviet Union and throughout Eastern Europe during the post-war period. The systematic brutality, the widespread atrocities, the ruthless suppression of independent thought, all this has been fully documented and verified. But my contention here is that the US crimes in the same period have only been superficially recorded, let alone documented, let alone acknowledged, let alone recognized as crimes at all. I believe this must be addressed, and that the truth has considerable bearing on where the world stands now. Although constrained to a certain extent by the existence of the Soviet Union, the United States' actions throughout the world made it clear that it had concluded that it had carte blanche to do what it liked. Now, direct invasion of a sovereign state has never, in fact, been America's favorite method. In the main, it has preferred what it has described as low-intensity conflict. Low-intensity conflict means that thousands of people die, but slower than if you dropped a bomb in one fell swoop. It means that you infect the heart of the country, that you establish a malignant growth and watch the gangrene bloom. When the populace has been subdued or beaten to death, it's the same thing, and your own friends, the military, and the great corporations sit comfortably in power, you go before the cameras and say, democracy has prevailed. This was a commonplace in US foreign policy in the years to which I refer. Now, Nicaragua. The tragedy of Nicaragua was a highly significant case. I choose to offer it here as a potent example of America's view of its role in the world, both then and now. I was present at a meeting in the US Embassy in London in the late 1980s. The United States Congress was about to decide whether to give more money to the Contras in their campaign against the state of Nicaragua. I was a member of a delegation speaking on behalf of Nicaragua, but the most important member of this delegation was a Father John Metcalf. The leader of the US body was Raymond Seitz, then number 2 to the ambassador, and later ambassador himself. Now, Father Metcalf said, "Sir, I'm in charge of a parish in northern Nicaragua. My parishioners built a school, a health center, a cultural center. We've lived in peace. A few months ago, a contraforce attacked the parish. They destroyed everything, the school, the health center, the cultural center. They raped nurses and teachers, slaughtered doctors in the most brutal manner. They behaved like savages. Please demand that the US government withdraw its support from this shocking terrorist activity." Raymond Seitz had a very good reputation as a rational, responsible, highly sophisticated man. He was greatly respected in diplomatic circles. He listened, paused, and then spoke with some gravity. Father, he said, "let me tell you something. In war, innocent people always suffer." There was a frozen silence. We stared at him. He did not flinch. Innocent people indeed always suffer. Finally, someone said, "But in this case, innocent people were the victims of a gruesome atrocity, subsidized by your government, one of many. If Congress allows the Contras more money, further atrocities of this kind will take place. Is this not the case? Is your government not therefore guilty of supporting acts of murder and destruction upon the citizens of a sovereign state?" Seitz was imperturbable. "I don't agree that the facts as presented support your assertions," he said. As we were leaving the US Embassy, an aide told me he enjoyed my plays. I did not reply. And I should remind you that at the time, President Reagan made the following statement: The Contras are the moral equivalent of our founding fathers. The United States supported the brutal Somoza dictatorship in Nicaragua for over 40 years. The Nicaraguan people, led by the Sandinistas, overthrew this regime in 1979 in a breathtaking popular revolution. Now, the Sandinistas weren't perfect. They possessed their fair share of arrogance, and their political philosophy contained a number of contradictory elements. But they were intelligent, rational, and civilized. They set out to establish a stable, decent, pluralistic society. The death penalty was abolished. Hundreds of thousands of poverty-stricken peasants were brought back from the dead. Over 100,000 families were given titles to land. 2,000 schools were built. A quite remarkable literacy campaign reduced illiteracy to, I think, 1/7. Free education was established and a free health service. Infant mortality was reduced by 1/3. Polio was eradicated. The United States denounced these achievements as Marxist-Leninist subversion. In the view of the US government, a dangerous example was being set, you see. If Nicaragua was allowed to establish basic norms of social and economic justice, if it was allowed to raise the standards of healthcare and education, and achieve social unity and national self-respect, neighboring countries might ask the same question and do the same things. There was, of course, at the time, fierce resistance to the status quo in El Salvador. I spoke earlier about a tapestry of lies which surround us. President Reagan commonly described Nicaragua as a totalitarian dungeon. This was taken generally by the media, and certainly by the British government, as an accurate and fair comment. But there was, in fact, no record of death squads under the Sandinista government. There was no record of torture. There was no record of systematic or official military brutality. No priests were ever murdered in Nicaragua. There were, in fact, 3 priests in the government, 2 Jesuits and a Maryknoll missionary. The totalitarian dungeons were actually next door in El Salvador, Guatemala. The United States brought down the democratically elected government in Guatemala in 1954, and it's estimated that over 200,000 people have been victims of successive military dictatorships. 6 of the most distinguished Jesuits in the world were viciously murdered and sent outside the Central University in San Salvador in 1989 by a battalion of the Alcatel Regiment trained at Fort Benning, Georgia, USA. That extremely brave man, Archbishop Romero, was assassinated while saying Mass. It's estimated that 75,000 people died. Why were they killed? They were killed because they believed that a better life was possible and should be achieved. That belief immediately qualified them as communists. They died because they dared to question the status quo, the endless plateau of poverty, disease, degradation, oppression, which had been their birthright. The United States finally brought down the Sandinista government. It took some years and considerable resistance, but relentless economic persecution, 30,000 dead, finally undermined the spirit of the Nicaraguan people. They were exhausted and poverty-stricken once again. The casinos moved back into the country, Free health and free education were over. Big business returned with a vengeance. Democracy had prevailed. But this policy was by no means restricted to Central America. It was conducted throughout the world. It was never ending. And it is as if it never happened. The United States supported and in most cases engendered every right-wing dictatorship in the world after the Second World War. I refer to Indonesia, Greece, Uruguay, Brazil, Paraguay, Haiti, Turkey, the Philippines, Guatemala, El Salvador, and of course, Chile. The horror that the United States inflicted upon Chile in 1973 can never be purged and never be forgiven. Hundreds of thousands of deaths took place throughout these countries. Did they take place? And are they, in all cases, attributable to US foreign policy? The answer is yes, they did take place, and they are attributable to American foreign policy. But you wouldn't know it. It never happened. Nothing ever happened. Even while it was happening, it wasn't happening. It didn't matter. It was of no interest. The crimes of the United States have been systematic, constant, vicious, remorseless, but very few people have actually talked about them. In fact, you have to hand it to America. It has exercised a quite clinical manipulation of power worldwide, while masquerading as a force for universal good. It's a brilliant, even witty, highly successful act of hypnosis. I put to you that the United States is without doubt the greatest show on the earth. Brutal, indifferent, scornful, and ruthless it may be, but it is also very clever. As a salesman, it's out on its own, and its most saleable commodity, self-love. It's a winner. Listen to all American presidents on television say the words, the American people, as in the sentence, I say to the American people, it is time to pray and to defend the rights of the American people. And I ask the American people to trust their president in the action he's about to take on behalf of the American people. It's a scintillating strategy. Language is actually employed to keep thought at bay. The words the American people provide a truly voluptuous cushion of assurance. You don't need to think. Just lie back on the cushion. The cushion may be suffocating your intelligence and your critical faculties, but it's a very comfortable cushion. This does not apply, of course, to the 40 million people living below the poverty line, and the 2 million men and women imprisoned in the vast gulag of prisons which extends across the US. The United States no longer bothers about low-intensity conflict. It no longer sees any point in being reticent or even devious. It puts its cards on the table without fear or favor. It quite simply doesn't give a damn about the United Nations, international law, or critical dissent, which it regards as impotent and irrelevant. It also has its own bleating little lamb tagging behind it on a lead, the pathetic and supine Great Britain. What has happened to our moral sensibility? Did we ever have any? What do these words mean? Do they refer to a term very rarely employed these days? Conscience. Conscience to do not only with our own acts, but to do with our shared responsibility in the acts of others. Is all this dead? Look at Guantanamo Bay. Hundreds of people detained without charge for over 3 years, with no legal representation or due process, technically detained forever. This totally illegitimate structure is maintained in defiance of the Geneva Convention. It's not only tolerated, but hardly thought about by what's called the international community. This criminal outrage is being committed by a country which declares itself the leader of the free world. Do we think about the inhabitants of Guantanamo Bay? What does the media say about them? They pop up occasionally, a small item on page 6. They've been consigned to a no man's land, from which indeed they may never return. At present, many are on hunger strike, being force-fed, including British residents. Now, there's no niceties about these force-feeding procedures. There's no sedative or anesthetic, just a tube stuck up your nose, into your throat. You vomit blood. This is torture. What does the British Foreign Secretary say about this? Nothing. What does the British Prime Minister say about this? Nothing. Why not? Because the United States has said, if you criticize our conduct in Guantanamo Bay, to criticize our conduct in Guantanamo Bay constitutes an unfriendly act. You're either with us or against us. So Blair shuts up. The invasion of Iraq was a bandit act, an act of blatant state terrorism, demonstrating absolute contempt for the concept of international law. The invasion was an arbitrary military action inspired by a series of lies upon lies and gross manipulation of the media, and therefore of the public. An act intended to consolidate American military and economic control of the Middle East, masquerading as a last resort, all other justifications having failed to justify themselves, as a liberation. A formidable assertion of military force responsible for the deaths and mutilations of thousands and thousands of innocent people. We have brought torture, cluster bombs, depleted uranium, innumerable acts of random murder, misery, degradation, and death to the Iraqi people. And we've called it bringing freedom and democracy to the Middle East. How many people do you have to kill before you qualify as... How many people do you have to kill to be described as a mass murderer and a war criminal? 100,000? More than enough, I would have thought. Therefore, it's just that Bush and Blair be arraigned before the International Court of Justice. But Bush has been clever, you see. He's not ratified the International Criminal Court of Justice. Therefore, if any American soldier, or for that matter politician, finds himself in the dock, Bush has warned that he'll send in the Marines. But Tony Blair has ratified the court and is therefore available for prosecution. We can let the court have his address if they're interested. It's number 10, Downing Street, London. Death in this context is irrelevant. Both Bush and Blair placed death well away on the back burner. At least 100,000 Iraqis were killed by American bombs and missiles before the Iraqi insurgency began. These people are of no moment. Their deaths don't exist. They're blank. They're not even recorded as being dead. We don't do body counts, said the American General Tommy Franks. Early in the invasion, there was a photograph published on the front page of British newspapers of Tony Blair kissing the cheek of a little Iraqi boy. A grateful child, said the caption. A few days later, there was a story and a photograph on the inside page of another 4-year-old boy with no arms. His family had been blown up by a missile. He was the only survivor. When do I get my arms back? He asked. The story was dropped. Well, Tony Blair wasn't holding him in his arms, or the body of any other mutilated child, nor the body of any bloody corpse. Blood is dirty. It dirties your shirt and tie when you're making a sincere speech on television. The 2,000 American dead are an embarrassment. They're transported to their graves in the dark. The funerals are unobtrusive, out of harm's way. The mutilated rot in their beds, some for the rest of their lives. So the dead and the mutilated both rot in different kinds of graves. Here's an extract from a poem by Pablo Neruda. I'm explaining a few things. And one morning, all that was burning. One morning, the bonfires leapt out of the earth, devouring human beings, and from then on, fire. Gunpowder from then on. And from then on, blood. Bandits with planes and Moors. Bandits with finger rings and duchesses. Bandits with black friars spattering blessings came through the sky to kill children, and the blood of children ran through the streets without fuss, like children's blood. Jackals that the jackals would despise, stones that the dry thistle would bite on and spit out, vipers that the vipers would abominate. Face to face with you, I have seen the blood of Spain tower like a tide to drown you in one wave of pride and knives. Treacherous generals, see my dead house. Look at broken Spain. From every house, burning metal flows instead of flowers. From every socket of Spain, Spain emerges. And from every dead child, a rifle with eyes. And from every crime, bullets are born, which will one day find the bullseye of your hearts. And you will ask, why doesn't his poetry speak of dreams and leaves and the great volcanoes of his native land? Come and see the blood in the streets. Come and see the blood in the streets. Come and see the blood in the streets. Let me make it quite clear that in quoting from Neruda's poem, I'm in no way comparing the Republican Spain to Saddam Hussein's Iraq. I quote Neruda because nowhere in contemporary poetry have I read such a powerful, visceral description of the bombing of civilians. I've said earlier that the United States is now totally frank about putting its cards on the table. That's the case. Its official declared policy is now defined as full spectrum dominance. That's not my term, it's theirs. Full spectrum dominance means control of land, sea, air, and space, and all attendant resources. The United States now occupies 702 military installations throughout the world in 132 countries, with the honorable exception of Sweden, of course. We don't quite know how they got there, but they're there, all right. The United States possesses 8,000 active and operational nuclear warheads. 2,000 are on hair trigger alert, ready to be launched within 15 minutes warning. It's developing new systems of nuclear force, known as bunker busters. The British, ever cooperative, are intended to replace their own nuclear missile, Trident. Who, I wonder, are they aiming at? Osama bin Laden? You? Me? Joe Dokes? China? Paris? Who knows? What we do know is that this infantile insanity, the possession and threatened use of nuclear weapons, is at the heart of present American political philosophy. We must remind ourselves that the United States is on a permanent military footing and shows no sign of relaxing it. Now, many thousands, if not millions, of people in the United States itself are demonstrably sickened, shamed, and angered by their government's actions. But as things stand, they're not a coherent political force yet. But the anxiety, the uncertainty and fear, which we can see growing daily in the United States, is unlikely to diminish. I know that President Bush has many extremely competent speechwriters, but I'd like to volunteer for the job myself. I propose the following short address, which he can make on television to the nation. I see him grave, hair carefully combed, serious, winning, sincere, often beguiling, sometimes employing a wry smile, curiously attractive, a man's man. God is good. God is great. God is good. My God is good. Bin Laden's God is bad. His is a bad God. Saddam's God was bad, except he didn't have one. He was a barbarian. We're not barbarians. We don't chop people's heads off. We believe in freedom. So does God. I'm not a barbarian. I am the democratically elected leader of a freedom-loving democracy. We're a compassionate society. We give compassionate electrocution and compassionate lethal injection. We're a great nation. I'm not a dictator. He is. I'm not a barbarian. He is. And he is. They all are. I possess moral authority. You see this fist? This is my moral authority. And don't you forget it. A writer's life is a highly vulnerable, almost naked activity. We don't have to weep about that. The writer makes his choice and is stuck with it. But it is true to say that you are open to all the winds. Some of them I see indeed. You're out on your own, out on a limb. You find no shelter, no protection, unless you lie, in which case, of course, you have constructed your own protection. And it could be argued, become a politician. I've referred to death quite a few times this evening. I shall now quote a poem of my own, called Death. Where was the dead body found? Who found the dead body? Was the dead body dead when found? How was the dead body found? Who was the dead body? Who was the father, or daughter, or brother, or uncle, or sister, or mother, or son of the dead and abandoned body? Was the body dead when abandoned? Was the body abandoned? By whom had it been abandoned? Was the dead body naked or dressed for a journey? What made you declare the dead body dead? Did you declare the dead body dead? How well did you know the dead body? How did you know the dead body was dead? Did you wash the dead body? Did you close both its eyes? Did you bury the body? Did you leave it abandoned? Did you kiss the dead body? When we look into a mirror, we think the image that confronts us is accurate. But move a millimeter and the image changes. We are actually looking at a never-ending range of reflections. But sometimes a writer has to smash the mirror. For it is on the other side of that mirror that the truth stares at us. I believe that despite the enormous odds which exist, unflinching, unswerving, fierce, intellectual determination by citizens, as citizens, to define the real truth of our lives and our societies is a crucial obligation which devolves upon us all. It is in fact mandatory. If such a determination is not embodied in our political vision, we have no hope of restoring what is so nearly lost to us, the dignity of man. I hope not. I just wanted to say a word to explain to you, because you may be wondering, who is this man? Is this character A, B, or C? Well, Reuben has been sitting in a room behind here, reading the script to me, which I've been hearing through this earpiece here. You probably realize. So much for listening so intently to Harold's wonderful speech. I've given my services free tonight to do this on 2 nights to raise consciousness and funds for Stop the War. As I very much hope Harold would have approved of. He did a lot to support Stop the War in his wonderful life. And I wanted to just say a word about it. What is Stop the War for? Well, it's against killing as a way of resolving our conflicts. As we are against killing in a way of resolving our conflicts in our homes, our families, our workplaces, our neighborhoods. There are situations, obviously, where if someone attacked me, or attacked my wife or my friends, violently and attempted to kill them, I might well kill them or use violence to defend myself. And it's arguable that in the Second World War, when the Nazis were going to come into this country and kill every Jewish citizen in this country, including Harold Pinter, which would have meant we would never have had his plays, that we fought against it. But there's also the context of what had led to that war, the failures of diplomacy, the cruelty of the settlement, the cruelty of the First World War, the cruelty of the time before the First World War. If you read the works of Andrew Carnegie, you can find out how much effort was made to avoid that terrible conflict which bred the situation where there was this group trying to come into England and kill the Jewish people here. Harold, in my understanding of what he felt, would have said he would have fought in that Second World War, not just because he was Jewish, but also because of the injustice of it. But after that war, he applied for conscientious objection twice and was declined. So, and I think what he's saying in this speech and the situation we feel now is that these wars that we're involved in now, since I've certainly been conscious of wars since the 80s, are nothing to do with our security. Nothing at all. If we're concerned about our security, we need to be concerned about what we're putting in our power stations, how many cars we're driving around, the particles we're breathing, what we're putting in our mouths. Much more than any threat of someone coming to bomb us. No, these wars are about something completely different. And what we're trying to do with Stop the War is convince people of the enormous benefits that will come if we invested even a tiny part of the amount of money we invest into so-called military violent solutions to conflict in other people's nations. Enormous benefits that could come to all people in this country if we desisted from that and invested rather in the proven techniques of peaceful resolution of conflict, techniques that we all use all the time in our lives. Why do we stand for it in our international affairs? Now that's a huge mountain to climb, isn't it, to convince Britain to change its way. But we think it's a mountain that's worthwhile trying to climb. And even though we may not get to the top of that mountain before we pass, at least our children will look back on us and say, well, they tried. So if you don't think that's such a good idea, then do pass us by, and there's no blame or criticism in that at all. But if you can help us and want to help us, then I think there are people outside with brochures about Stop the War, and maybe £10 of each of your ticket money has gone towards Stop the War. I think it's a cause that Harold believed in, and I certainly believe in, and I know many of you here do too. So thank you so much for coming out tonight to hear this speech and support.